You're fired.
All right, good evening. Welcome to the Commonwealth Club of California, the place where you're in the know. I'm Ted Robinson, the moderator tonight. You can find us at commonwealthclub.org, Facebook and Twitter, on our YouTube channel. And we are joined tonight by two very special men in a very timely moment in college football. There are all kinds of words that are being flown around in college football today: unionization, licensing rights, litigation, compensation, and unfortunately, a lot of them are flying around at a very critical time for college sports. We have two gentlemen here who have presided over very successful, healthy conferences, very successful, healthy businesses, and now will navigate through this new landscape in college sports. And seated on the far right to me is a gentleman who came to the Pac-12 after a long career in the world of tennis. He went to Harvard, where he played tennis, was an All-American there, played professionally on the tour. After that, worked for the ATP Properties, that's the men's tennis tour, as the president and COO, and then spent 6 years as the chairman and CEO of the Women's Tennis Association. One of the major fights that he waged and won in that time was for equal prize money for men and women, most notably at the most prestigious tennis championship at Wimbledon. Please welcome the commissioner of the Pac-12 Conference, Larry Scott. One of the most respected men in college athletics, 25 years at the helm of the Big Ten Conference. He was a New Jersey native, played basketball at North Carolina, where he was a co-captain, also a law degree from North Carolina, worked for the NCAA briefly before becoming the commissioner of the Ohio Valley Conference, and then to the Big Ten in 1989. One of his first acts was to grab for membership one of the most coveted independent schools in the country in Penn State, starting nearly now a 2-decade-plus period of prosperity for the Big Ten. 2004, leading the way to introduce replay for college football games. 2007, on the air with the Big Ten Network, which is now in 90 million homes. And this year, we'll welcome Rutgers and Maryland to the conference, which will therefore spread the Big Ten from the Mississippi River to the eastern seaboard. With the Pac-10 going from the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific Coast, you have an idea. These are the two conferences with the largest footprints in America. But we are honored to have him in San Francisco, Commissioner Jim Delaney of the Big Ten Conference. So there's a lot of news, and I promise we will get to that. But very quickly, some business of the day. Jim, you're here. It's the San Francisco Bowl. The Big Ten and the Pac-12 now have combined for, I think many of us would agree, one of the greatest American sport traditions is the Rose Bowl. One of the greatest. And amen. Ronnie knows. And now you're pairing up for a second time. What made the San Francisco Bowl happen?
Well, you know, I think to have a great bowl, you have a great city. You have that in San Francisco, a great venue. You have that with Levi Stadium, a great opponent in the Pac-12. We've got a history that goes back many, many decades. And so we just thought all the ingredients were here. The bowl was looking to take a step up. ESPN is the supporter of the bowl. So we just thought it was a tremendous opportunity to partner again with the Pac-12, and people are really excited. Our players and coaches are really excited about coming out here to play. I think it's December 30th this year at 7 p.m.
And Larry, this is elevating because the Pac-12 is going to send, I believe, the 4th representative now from the conference. It's going to be the highest ranked representative to this bowl game.
Correct. Yeah, we're delighted to extend our partnership with the San Francisco Bowl and to see it elevate to yet another level. And it's elevating primarily for 3 reasons. One is we are going to be providing a better team than we've provided in the past to this bowl. It's now 4th in our lineup. Now we've got a big-time opponent in the Big Ten, where you're going to see 2 big brand-name schools from the Pac-12 and the Big Ten competing against each other. So it's going to be a great matchup. Everyone loves seeing the big schools play against each other on big stages. And that leads to the third point. It's a bigger stage than it's been before. Playing at the new Levi Stadium, state-of-the-art football venue, going to be one of the most exciting places to play football in this country. There'll be a lot of excitement around that. And of course, our student athletes and our coaches love that, love playing in state-of-the-art venues, pro NFL venues. So there's a lot of momentum, a lot of excitement about this bowl game and it really rising to the next level.
And of course, maintaining the bowl week activities in the city of San Francisco. Was that significant as well?
You know, it was. We've got a lot of people living out here. I think we have 300,000 Big Ten alums living in California, probably 100,000 in this area. And so to be here over the holiday season, as Larry said, to play in a state-of-the-art facility, play against the Pac-12. It's really exciting, and for the next 6 years, we're going to dig in and live here and try to help build.
How hard was it to keep the Rose Bowl intact with all, and a playoff system coming this year and a championship game, to keep the Rose Bowl?
Well, it was, I think, both of our priorities to try to make sure that the Rose Bowl tradition was relevant going into the 21st century. There's been a lot of change in the last 20 years in college football. It's more popular than ever. But we've been able to integrate first the BCS and now the college football playoff within the bowl system. And so I was really pleased, and I think Larry was too, presidents, athletic directors, and coaches, to be able to maintain that important tradition as a central part of the identity going forward. So it was not easy because others wanted, people, not everyone is supportive of the Rose Bowls of the Big Ten and the Pac-12. So,
Yeah.
but we were successful at doing it, so we feel good about it.
It's been a real balancing act, and Jim and I have enjoyed working with each other on this with our other commissioner colleagues from across the country. It was really a daunting challenge. We together enjoy, as partners, our conferences being part of one of the greatest sporting traditions in all of America. I mean, the most historic bowl game every year, year in, year out. It's the most highly rated bowl game, best attended. It's got this amazing tradition. I mean, we've been playing in the game for 100 years, and together as partners, we've been in it for decades. So we didn't want to give up this privileged position we have. And any student athletes that are recruited to our schools to play football, I mean, they come in thinking they're going to have a chance to play for the Rose Bowl. I mean, that's why they come. The coaches at the beginning of the year, when they're getting the players ready, they're talking about we're competing for a Rose Bowl. I mean, it's part and parcel to playing for a Pac-12 Big Ten team. So it's really ingrained in the traditions and the heritage of our two conferences. So on the one hand, you don't want to diminish that in any way. By the same token, we've had this clamor from fans, from media over many years, wanting a playoff. There was a lot of controversy, a lot of dissatisfaction with the way the college football season would end. So, we spent many, many hours. It's been amongst the highest priorities, I think, for Jim and myself and our respective presidents and athletics directors. How do you balance these things? How do we preserve the importance of the Rose Bowl and, importantly, the tradition that it's a Big Ten, Pac-12 matchup, January 1st, 2 p.m., in that amazing stadium, and right after the parade. I mean, everything that goes into making the Rose Bowl special. But at the same time, things change in the world, and we need to progress, and we need to be responsive to fans, and felt that it would be in the best interests of sport of college football and our universities, therefore, to figure out a way to do a playoff. So I think we struck a very elegant balance in coming up with a 4-team playoff that's going to allow for 4 teams to go and play a semifinal and then a championship game, but and have the Rose Bowl be part of that. So 1 out of every 3 years, one of the semifinal games will be held at the Rose Bowl, so they're part of it. The Rose Bowl will continue to be positioned amongst the elite bowl games in all of college football, so we've got that. But in the other years, 2 out of 3 years, it's a traditional Rose Bowl game. Best available Big Ten team against Pac-12 team. So, it's we feel very good about juggling those two things.
Is the 4-team structure to start the playoff, do we think this is a test to see how it plays?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think that it's complex. It's 4 teams, 2 games,
Right.
2 winners,
Right.
and a champion.
Could it be 8 teams
Could-
down the line? That was my point.
Oh, I know your point.
Yeah.
I would say for the next 12 years it'll be 4 teams, and who's to say beyond that? There was a clamor from day one in the BCS it should be 4. We stuck with it. I think college football was the beneficiary, a sport that was really a regional sport with a few exceptions. There were some national games there, but by and large it was a regional sport. If you go back to the beginning of the BCS, it was controversial, successful and controversial, but it really built the sport. It built interest in the West and games in the Midwest and the Southeast. And so any indicator you would look at, whether it's television ratings or attendance or fan enthusiasm, I mean, the NFL is up here and all the other college and pro sports were down here, and college football has separated itself. And so that I attribute a lot of that to not only the coaches and players, but I also attribute it to the postseason format which I think really energized college football. So I'm hoping that going forward that the new format can be as powerfully positive as the previous format. And I think you don't make judgments on a year-to-year basis. You give it time to brew, and so I'm hoping it stays stable for a while.
Will we come to hear terms that we've learned, those of us that follow college basketball, like strength of schedule, RPI, that there is a selection process? Will those terms now become familiar to us in college football?
Yeah, there'll be slightly different terminology, but I think some of the same concepts. We felt it was important to have a selection committee to determine the 4 teams that would be in the playoff, because there was a lot of dissatisfaction with the BCS and the way the BCS computer would determine the top 2 teams. It was a combination of subjective media polls, often that had preseason rankings factored into their criteria, and then some computer formulas that were not transparent in terms of how they operated. So I think no one was ever completely satisfied with the way the BCS computers worked. Going to a 14 playoff, there's obviously a ton at stake in terms of who gets in, and then you have to seed the teams, 1-4 versus 2-3. And there was a feeling that based on the success of the men's basketball committee, a committee of really qualified, high-integrity people from diverse backgrounds was the way to go, because there aren't really a lot of data points in a college football season. We've got 12 regular season games that we play. I think in both of our cases, 9 of which are going to be conference games. So you've got precious few chances to play against non-conference opponents. So it's really hard to judge the relative strength one conference to another. There's a lot of things you need to look at, and so we've got this committee. But one of the things that has been made clear to the committee is that at the end of any season, there'll be potentially multiple 11-1 teams, 10-2 teams. You've got to differentiate amongst them, and you don't have a lot of head-to-head results to rely on. So what we've said is we really want to reward those teams that put it on the line and play tough schedules. So winning conference championships and strength of schedule, winning against tough opponents, are going to be essentially the tiebreaker criteria for the committee.
Fans love hearing that. And Jim, I read a couple of comments you made about that you say we owe fans games. We want it to matter who we play, and your conference is going to go to 9 games.
Yeah, I mean, I think fans and players love games. I think coaches like to win. Yeah. And there's a reason for that, of course. But we like 9 games. We're a larger conference than we were. We like to play each other more. We like to bind the conference together through competition. And I think that by and large, the average conference game is better than the average non-conference game. And if you judge it by television or fans or season ticket holders, they appreciate that. And it is hard. There aren't enough data points. It's not like a basketball season with 30 games. You have 12 games. We have 9 that are meaningful. And we've also encouraged our schools to play one opponent from a comparable power conference and to avoid those that really don't have the same number of scholarships. That's not fair competition when somebody's got 85 and somebody else has 63. They have some great teams. Appalachian State beat Michigan. Okay, that was one of the big upsets in college football history. But we think playing good teams, whether it's in the postseason, in the regular season, or in the conference, is what competition is about.
Well, that's a perfect segue, what you just said, Jim, to autonomy, which is one of the buzzwords we've been hearing an awful lot about. Larry, the presidents of the Pac-12 came out and issued a letter that I think everybody is probably aware of in the room yesterday. Was that a call to act? Was that a call to say we're ready to go, follow us?
To some extent, I think it's more about wanting to be really clear amongst the top 5 conferences and for the public about what it is we intend to do for student athletes and what it is we intend to do to restore the academic priority. I think a lot of issues have cropped up over the last several months about whether student athletes are getting enough support and enough benefits, and questioning the scholarship limits on the one hand. And a lot of issues have cropped up about the amount of time that student athletes are having to spend practicing, competing, traveling, officially and unofficially, and whether there's enough breathing room to really have the freedom to pursue what they want to pursue academically and to be fully integrated into campus life and student life. So those are the two big priorities for our presidents. With all the money that is around and in the system, want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support student athletes, including the full cost of attendance, better insurance coverage, guaranteeing scholarships that in a reasonable period of time you can get your bachelor's degree, things that would require financial support that are reasonable, want to make sure that we're doing, and figuring out a way to better monitor, pull back, restrict the number of hours student athletes are being asked to spend on their sports to make sure that they're students first and that they can be fully integrated. And that's, those are the main themes. So the purpose of the letter went out, there's a lot of progress that's been made and a lot of work that's gone into giving our 5 conferences the flexibility to set some policies that support student athletes along these lines. But what our presidents want to make clear is what is it that we intend to do, and felt that it's really important to send a signal about what we intend to do because there's a lot of carping going on out there. Congress is getting involved, there's efforts to unionize, there's lawsuits, so there's a lot of criticism of the system. And I think there's a statement saying, the leaders of our institutions, of intercollegiate athletics, are reform-minded, want to do more, intend to do more, will do more.
And Jim, the voice that started the unionization came from a school in your conference, Northwestern. Do you find common ground with many of the points that Kane Coulter made?
I do. In fact, I do. I think Kane brought up some really good points. I think it's the means to the end. To be honest with you, I can't argue with any of the substantive ideas that he brought to the fore. They should be debated, discussed, and where appropriate, enacted. I would say that in many ways, the regulatory system over the last even 30 years has been stuck. It's so diverse. There's so many different kinds of institutions with so many different purposes. I know when I was playing, which was a long time ago, there was a 4-year scholarship in effect. Freshmen were not eligible. The time demands were not what they are today. We receive $15 a month laundry. And for a kid who, came from a background with not a lot, we had a travel team blazer. But, there was a recession in the early 70s. Freshmen became eligible. 4-year scholarships became one. The $15 disappeared, and I was down to one sport coat. So that things need to change. We have the resources. We haven't had the legislative flexibility. I really like the directionality that of the proposals that are letter from the Pac-12 presidents to our presidents. I think there's going to be a lot of alignment. We still have some work to do. I'm not saying there's unanimity, but I think that there's a lot of momentum for change. And you don't control what happens in Congress or what happens in the courts, but you can control these things, and we should.
And is the point to keep the control as much as you can in the decision-making within your group?
I'd say I'd say that's the main message, that change needs to happen. More support needs to happen for student athletes. We need to restore the academic primacy of the experience for student athletes. But unionization, treating students as employees, Congress getting involved, that's the wrong remedy. That this can happen within the collegiate model.
There are some imbalances in the system. I don't think there's any doubt that over time, young people selecting a sport earlier and training intensely and thinking about an NFL or an NBA mindset, starts in the early teens. And so a lot of this comes to us. The technology has allowed for more television. We own our own networks. Coaches' compensation has been, driven high as a result of market factors. And so the way I look at it is, we should return some balance to the enterprise. This is not a Republican or a Democratic issue. Intercollegiate athletics is uniquely American. We have a responsibility in higher education to provide opportunities to a broad array of young people, and within the resources we have to do it in an equitable way. So I think that this is a wake-up call and an opportunity to do better.
A question from one of our attendees here ask the specific point from the 10-point plan that the president sent out about the stipend. And again, there have been various ways we can phrase this, but the most common one, bluntest, is probably pay for play. But whatever the mechanism you use, is it something that's already being discussed in both of your conferences?
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about it, and I think there's a real developing alignment about it. And I don't think we'd use the word stipend anymore. There was a proposal for a stipend a couple of years ago, a flat $2,000 amount that each full scholarship student athlete would have received. That's evolved to just looking at whatever's the full cost of attendance, which is a different amount at every school. The scholarship rules haven't changed apparently since the 1970s. I mean, it's a fixed amount, but the true cost of attending each of our schools is somewhat different. So essentially the proposal that's on the table is saying that whatever is the full cost of attendance at any of our schools, that's the amount that you could compensate student athletes with in the form of scholarship. It's
Yeah, I mean, I
pretty
think-
simple concept.
Yeah, and you know, the stipend is a set amount, and I think, as Larry noted, there's a different cost to go to school at Michigan State than maybe Stanford, than Duke and North Carolina. So it'll be a little different. Our coaches have gotten so used to, you know, measuring competitive advantage in milliseconds and micro, you know, nanoseconds. Well, we're not going to be able to do that. That's one of the challenges that we have, is that, you know, if it costs X to go to Stanford, that's what it costs. And we're not going to be able to have artificial limits about that. I guess my bottom line is students should receive what it costs to go to college. Anything more than that constitutes pay for play. But if it's about getting a degree and having your financial needs taken care of while you're in college, I think we should be able to do that.
For those listening to us, that is Jim Delaney, the commissioner of the Big Ten Conference, Larry Scott with us, the commissioner of the Pac-12 Conference. And discussing that, again, is the discussions include women athletes and Olympic sports? Football, we're here because of football. Football drives it, but it trickles down to those levels, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it does. How the mechanism for meeting Title IX is probably not crystal clear. You have a variety of federal laws. You have labor law, you have antitrust law, you have Title IX law. So we're all going to have to be in compliance with federal law. We think we are. In a number of cases, we'll vigorously defend our position to that extent. But I think that you know, this is not about professionalizing athletes. This is about prioritizing the resources you have to provide for men and women opportunities to go to college. Now, I don't think that it means that every athlete who plays college in every sport has a full scholarship. That's not true today.
Right.
And it won't be true tomorrow either. But we're going to have to, you know, work as hard as we can to return some balance in the litigation, to be aggressively principled in defending those lawsuits. And then, you know, if these laws are in conflict, we'll need some guidance from friends in Washington.
And it's a point, Ted, that's often overlooked, certainly by the media. I mean, a lot of the narrative in the media is about football. In fact, this unionization effort in Northwestern is only about the football team. They should be paid. So, you know, that's what a lot of people focus on. In our conference in the Pac-12, we've got 7,000 student athletes. A pretty equal balance between male and female student athletes. The Big Ten's got, what, 8,000 or 9,000 student athletes?
Almost 10,000.
10,000 student athletes. We've got it across 35 sports. I'm sure in the Big Ten it's a similar number. And it's true that football is a major revenue generator. It's true that men's basketball in both our conferences generates a lot of revenue. That revenue is being used to support these, you know, between our two conferences, 17,000 student athletes across 35 different sports. And that's something we're very proud of and is really core to the mission of our schools, is that we offer broad-based opportunity for participation in intercollegiate athletics because it's a fundamental part and a great part of the overall academic mission. And the real shame in all this discussion is if, you know, some of this discussion leads to extreme or radical solutions that sucked a lot of the resources that are being used to support these Olympic sports and women's sports to just football or men's basketball. Sports would get cut. And that would be an awful shame.
Maybe morphing this a little bit into, because we've talked a lot here about the student-athlete experience, because this is, after all, an entertainment enterprise as well to the fans. Both of you run television networks. The Pac-12 network, I've seen it firsthand, has been a tremendous learning tool for students who are studying broadcasting at the Pac-12 universities. I'm sure the Big Ten network has done the same thing. Consequence, one of our questioners, the number one question I hear all fall, and I'm sure both of you hear it too, is maybe more so Larry, night games. Fans, and this is a question about the TV contract, night games. Where's the balance right now in both of your minds about the fan and the fan experience versus answering to the other responsibilities?
It is a balancing act, big juggling act. I mean, for our conference, we're at a different stage of our history and trajectory than maybe the Big Ten. In 2009, when I arrived, we were really suffering relatively to the Big Ten and the SEC in terms of the exposure that we were receiving and in terms of the revenue that we were receiving. We were well behind the Big Ten, the SEC, and some of the other conferences. A lot of our broadcasts on ABC and Fox Sports Net were regionalized, weren't available to most of the country, including the East Coast. So, an important mandate for me from our presidents coming on board was how are we going to be more competitive financially so that our programs can still be competitive and we didn't have to cut other Olympic sports and whatnot, and how are we going to get broader national exposure. So when we redid our TV agreements, we were at the table with the broadcasters saying, we want more revenue, we need full national distribution, not just regional West Coast distribution, on par with the other conferences. And as happens in negotiations, say, well, if you want that, this is what we need. And what broadcasters tend to want and need is flexibility in terms of scheduling. So we as a conference had been amongst the most conservative and traditional about when we would play games, particularly basketball. We'd only play Thursday and Saturday. Football, we were pretty traditional as well, although we did have some Thursday night games. So this will oversimplify it, but essentially we traded much greater national exposure, much greater revenue, and the ability to start our own network for more flexibility on the scheduling. And that meant now basketball, we play Wednesday and Thursday, men's basketball, as well as Saturday and Sunday, and we have to play double headers on Wednesday and Thursday as well to get all of the games on TV. And in terms of football, Saturday, it means we're not just playing during the afternoon, but we are playing more night games because ESPN and Fox really value our nighttime window. Why do they value our nighttime window? Because during any given Saturday afternoon, you've got an awful lot of football games. You've got 50 football games going on across the country from the big conferences. You've got Big Ten, ACC, SEC, Big 12 games on, and Pac-12 games. We've got some games at 12:30, 3, of course. But the only one of the Big Five conferences that can play a game at 7 p.m. West Coast time is the Pac-12 of this caliber that's going to generate great ratings and value for them from an advertiser perspective. So that was the quid pro quo. We had to make a change. We did it with our eyes wide open, but it's caused a real adjustment for fans. It's caused some frustration amongst fans. So in any agreement with broadcast partners and others, you sit down every year and you try to work on it. So we're going to try to reduce the number of night games because it's made it difficult for some of our campuses to play so many night games. So we're talking about those kinds of things right now, how we do slightly less, but we're always going to have that nighttime window because it's very, very valuable for the broadcast partners.
They just gave us the money.
Yeah.
They didn't ask for anything in return.
I went to a game at my alma mater, this was about 3 years ago, and I sat on a wooden bench with splinters, and every time there was a challenge of a video replay, there was no video board in the stadium, so none of the fans knew what was happening. Every television commercial break was 4 minutes, and I paid, I think, $75 for my ticket, and I walked out and I turned to my family, I said, I'd do that again. And the lesson you learn is that your sport is an emotional buy. And the professional sports come across, and it's about customer relations and all of the business angles. I'd be curious to hear how much of this is entering into both of your thoughts about that you're steward over an emotional purchase. At some point, does the fan customer experience enter in?
I think that we're all aware of it. I'm not sure that anyone who's building a stadium today would build a 100,000 person stadium. You know, it's a different time. When I came in '89, the Big Ten had 16 televised games, 10 on ABC and 6 on ESPN. We own our own network. Every game is available nationally and or globally. And I think the choices that people have, the attention span that they have all been reduced to some extent. They do want more. You know, they don't want to. The man cave is a great cave. You know, it's a great way to watch sports. We all want to increase it and upgrade it all the time. We're like, you know, coaches. We want a better man cave, and so we're competing against that experience. And so we've had to liberalize our rules on replay, what we show and what we don't show, and we're showing more than we have in the past.
In the stadium.
In the stadium.
Yeah.
We increased the number of games from 11 to 12 10 years ago. I'm not sure that we, you know, all added an opponent that our fans really cared about. And so I think that was dilutional. All the games are on TV. Not all of them should be on TV, probably. A game late in the season in bad weather, probably there's not a great audience for it, but that's part and parcel of some of the compromises that we do make. We've been fortunate, our attendance has grown. I mean, we were at 58,000 in 1989, and we're over 70,000 today. Part of that is the you know, the growth of stadiums, but there's a lot of interest. But we're aware, alert, and concerned, and are very much interested in that connection between the fan and the time they spend in our stadium and what they get to see and the competition at home. And I think everybody, I'm not sure the data is maybe as good as you would like to see it, but we want to make sure the young people have the same habit that their dads had and their grandparents and their moms had, because ours is so much a tailgating experience, a family experience, intergenerational. And so I think that's something to keep our eye on. But, you know, we've got big stadiums, and we need to have a good game on the field to keep people interested.
We have a question here that, again, relates to something that's been very much in the news and very serious. What are the Pac-12 and Big Ten Conference doing in regards to the epidemic of sexual assaults on U.S. campuses? We've had a massive report in the New York Times, a government release of this several weeks ago. I think, unfortunately, Oregon just dealt with one on their campus with their basketball program. It does bleed into, again, the varied responsibilities way outside of sports that now seem incumbent upon both of you and your jobs.
Well, that's the point I was going to make. It's an issue well beyond sports. I mean, we read about it when it involves student athletes, you know, Jameis Winston, and recently at Oregon. I mean, you know, sports gets the headlines, gets the attention, but it's a much broader issue that is dealt with utmost seriousness at our campuses, usually at the level of the office of the president. So it's not something that's isolated. And when there is an instance within athletics, it gets kicked quickly to the office of the president, the general counsel of the university.
I would agree with Larry. I mean, it's a congressional issue. It's a White House issue. It's a Department of Education. I think 66 universities received letters from the Department of Education. It's partly legal. It's partly an issue of education. It's partly an issue of fairness, both to the individual who's been abused as well as the abuser. And the schools, I think, in some ways, are struggling to develop procedures and processes that pass the test of fairness in this area, as I read it, and try to follow it. But it is a broad national higher educational challenge that is not restricted to or limited to an athletic department or music department or you know, medical school problem. It is a cultural, social problem that exists on our campuses. It's very serious.
Yeah. And Jim Delaney, in your 25 years, you've seen this grow where it appears that there's far more accountability and responsibility being placed on athletic programs, coaches, for conduct and behavior away from the sport. Am I off there?
Oh, I don't know. It's hard to measure that, really. You monitor it, you see it, you know, you go through periods of time where there's a lot of activity in a particular program. It's really hard to know how different things were 25 years ago from how they are today, because I think social media has a way of unearthing conduct and activity that didn't exist in the past. And so I think, human beings are human beings, and I don't think they're probably any more saintly or any more, difficult than they were 20 years ago. So, but athletics has its own section in the newspaper. People are passionate about it, and they know the names and the faces of the people that they're reading about. So it inspires a certain followership that you don't get out of the normal student body activities.
We're about 5 minutes away from where we're going to have you walk to our microphone. It'll be set up here and be able to ask questions. So we wanted to give you about a 5-minute warning on that. Another question from an attendee here, and it relates to the bowl game, because you're going to Levi Stadium, both for the Pac-12 championship game now and the San Francisco Bowl, which is being designed to be technologically state-of-the-art in that fight to attract fans, to make sure the fan doesn't go and sit in the man cave, that the fan comes to the stadium. Conference-wise, how are both of you addressing technology and innovation and staying at least on the wave with that?
Yeah. Well, I'd say college football is enjoying huge popularity. It's very successful. There's an amazing tribal passion, as you pointed to, around it's multi-generational. It's very unique in this country. But I don't think any of us take that for granted. I mean, society is changing very fast. Technology is changing very fast. And it's not just the man cave, but we notice it actually with students attending games. That's not necessarily a man cave issue. I think people's attention span is changing. There's a lot more distractions, a lot more options. So I think there's a challenge broadly for live sports that we think about, wrestle with. Jim and I and our colleagues meet with the NFL every year, and they're thinking about it, and we share ideas. And what we're doing in our conference is we've got a group in our conference office that meets with the campuses regularly to share best practice and talk about some of these issues around technology. And first and foremost, making sure that the telecommunications technology is such that people can make phone calls and they can text. I mean, we've still got some outdated stadia, or have had up till now, where you just don't have enough bandwidth. Can't even make a phone call and text, let alone upgrade a photo to Facebook or engage in social media. And especially for younger generations, I use the analogy, if you come to a sporting event and all of a sudden, you can't upload or post that you're there or communicate with your friends, it's like cutting off oxygen. And it's hard to imagine attracting students or young people to an environment where they can't be engaging and can't be using their device. So I think we just have to realize society is changing, and the investments that have to be made in technology in our stadia to keep up with that.
And that's a challenge, isn't it, even when universities, when you're going to Levi Stadium, which is being built for that purpose, when universities own their stadiums, and Jim, in your conference, some that have been around for quite a while.
Yeah.
That's a bigger challenge to get them technologically.
Yeah, it's just not an issue of cost, it's an issue of technology. I mean, I know people who are willing to invest but haven't found a surefire way of being able to create enough bandwidth that they can accommodate 110,000 people and feel comfortable about that. So we'll get there. It's, I think, a high priority. People are very aware of it. I think Larry put it really well. If you're going to want people to adopt, you have to adapt to what it is they need. If you want them to adopt your style, you have to adapt to their needs.
And does that extend to the website? I know, Larry, that you've made a tremendous investment in the Pac12.com and the digital side to allow your young, student-oriented, collegiate fan base to follow the conference that way.
Yeah, well, we sure do. I mean, thinking about the future, I mean, the lines between what we think of as television and what we think of as digital media or websites, I think will blur. We think of it as content, and the device that everyone carries around as their companion is ultimately going to be the same thing as the TV. So, I mean, all the video content and other content that we think about delivering through TV has to be delivered over time. I mean, technology's still got to catch up, and some of the legal issues around rights have to catch up. But we're very much thinking about that world where you ought to be able to do everything on your device that you could do in your living room.
All right, I'm going to change lanes for 1 minute before we take questions here. I had a fascinating friendly argument with a basketball coach in your league, Jim, Bo Ryan, during the NCAA tournament about the state of college basketball. And this comes actually a question from one of our attendees as well. And it was about and I can't think of another term to use, but the loophole that players have found in college basketball, which is free agency. If they get a degree, they can go play at another school with a minor academic blip, which most players find a way to clear. The Pac-12 presidents in the letter wrote about the one and done issue, and if the NBA doesn't cooperate. Where college basketball is heading in all of what we're talking about here, trying to improve experience for student athletes, when you have players that either are jumping schools at the end of their run or on the front end are using it as a one-year developmental stop for the pros.
Yeah, those are challenges, there's no doubt about it. It's about a balance between the flexibility you want to provide to a young person on the one hand and the need for some stability and sustainability in your programs. So I'm not an absolutist either way. You know, when I was a student, it was a long time ago, and things have changed dramatically, but I didn't think there was anything wrong with freshman ineligibility. It was done away with during the war when there weren't enough men to play. Then it was done away with in the early 70s because of economic reasons. There was stress. There wasn't enough money, so they made more players eligible. And I don't think it's been good because it used to be that a year in residence was a precondition to play intercollegiate athletics. Now intercollegiate athletics is seen as the pathway to professional sports. And I sort of resent the idea that college basketball and college football are the exclusive way for someone to become a pro athlete, because I don't think that's our rightful role. I think we should provide an opportunity to play, get an education. I think training is great. But if a person really is committed to the NFL, let them go to IMG and have someone invest in them, and let them go 24/7, train their body if they don't want to be in school. And so I have a very mixed feeling about the immediate, and I don't like the early enrollment of players. Players are leaving high school in their middle of their senior year to get into a program, and then we got players leaving after 1 year. And so I would like to see a system where the NFL and the NBA take on a greater responsibility for minor leagues. And if players are committed to the professional track, I respect that. That's choice. And the players that come and want to get an education and play sports, I think the Southern Cal UCLA game will be fine. I think Ohio State Michigan will be fine. I really do. I think we'll be fine. But I also understand that, you know, when you're recruited, the connection between the coach and the player is an intense and important one. And so when coaches leave and players are left there, I have a sensitivity to that. I don't know about going to another school to get another degree that's not available at your own. I don't think that's real. I think that's just a ploy. And so, but I'm not against a person transferring. So I would, in a perfect world for me, I would like to see players have the freedom to go professional early like they do in baseball. If somebody wants to invest in them, that's fine. If they come, I'd like to see stability about the college they go to for the most part. And then if they move on, I think there should be a year of waiting, and then they could play. And so I think there's got to be, right now it's an unstable, in some ways unsustainable system where everybody has got this dream of being a pro athlete, and college is the pathway to achieve that, or the only pathway to achieve that.
Last follow-up, and then we'll go to the questions. Is there no remedy for you in the basketball world? Because as you said, the football realm, it's 3 years. The baseball is 3 years.
Those are their rules.
There's stability.
Those are their rules.
Right.
That's between the owners of pro sports teams and their union. So they have we shouldn't be engaged in that. That's what they do. I'm just saying from a personal perspective, I like the stability in the football rule, but it's their rule, not our rule. I would like to see something comparable, and I like the baseball rule. The baseball rule is a better rule than the football rule, because in the baseball rule, if you're really committed to be a pro, you can go pro out of high school. Once you decide to go to college, you stay there for a while, and they respect that rule. And so I think that, you know, what happens is we should be thinking about the high schools. The colleges have nothing to do with the pros. The pros should be thinking about what's good for the sport as well as what's good for the union and good for management. And I'm not sure that's always been the case.
All right, we have a microphone set up right here. Please, if you'd like to step up there.
I was just wondering what you thought of the O'Bannon lawsuit.
Well, I disagree with the O'Bannon lawsuit. We're the defendant. We're not a defendant, but we're like a defendant. The NCAA is the defendant, but the colleges ultimately would be responsible. I think that students should go to college, get an education. I think the assets and the resources that are developed in college should be shared and spread among all athletes. I think we can do better than we are doing in terms of the definition of the scholarship and returning to school. But, we're going to defend that lawsuit in the trial level. We're going to defend it at the appellate level, and we'll defend it as long as there's a case there to defend. But I don't agree with it. I don't agree with the plaintiffs.
All right, please, did someone else make a stand? Yes, sir, go right ahead.
I have a question. I guess it's for Jim with the Big Ten. I'm interested in the expansion to include Rutgers and Maryland in the program or in the conference going forward. And on the surface, it seems to me there's questions about what's the commonality of culture, history, and so forth. Geographically, they're more distant. And so I guess I'd be interested in what was the philosophy and motivation of the Big Ten Conference in making that move?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that a little history is probably instructive. Forever, conferences were in a confined geographic area. The Pac-12 was on the Pacific coast. Forever, the ACC was in Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. Forever, the SEC was in the southeastern United States. Last time I looked, Utah and Colorado are not on the Pacific Ocean. Last time I looked, the ACC was in Indiana and Pennsylvania, New York, Boston. So last time I looked, Texas and Missouri were not in the southeastern part of the United States. So there was a paradigm shift that occurred. We made a change with Penn State 20-some years ago, and we were pretty happy, to be honest with you. For 20 years, everybody else pretty much went to 12. I think the Pac-12 stayed at 10 for a long time, but everybody else had gone to 12. We stayed at 11. We looked around. We added Nebraska. We were still pretty happy to stay there. And then, we worked with the Pac-12. We didn't get the collaboration going, but that was what we were trying to do. But then, to be honest with you, the thing shifted. The ACC was in Big Ten. The SEC was near the Big Ten. And we were fortunate, to be honest with you, that there were two AAU members. Rutgers and Maryland are both great universities. They gave us access to students, to student athletes. And, we thought, well, if the paradigm has shifted and all five conferences are in double regions, bi-regional conferences, that's what we're going to do. So I would say it was partly a competitive situation. We were fortunate that all the schools that have come into the Big Ten are major research institutions. They're in contiguous states. And there's a lot of action from financial to educational to media and political in that corridor. And as far as how far away it is, it's not very far away. It's probably an extra 15 to 20 minutes over the state of Pennsylvania, an extra 40 minutes past Columbus. And so I think there's been a lot of discussion, but I'll tell you, there's been an awful lot of enthusiasm in the East for the Big Ten. And the Big Ten probably, in many cases, a lot of people would probably like to stay where it is. But if we stayed where we were and there was no Nebraska, no Penn State, no Maryland, and no Rutgers, I wouldn't want to be competing against the conferences that have really moved into our area, moved into other areas. Whether it's right or wrong, history will judge that. But my view is that things do change. We're in an international global world, one where internet and jet airplanes have been around for a while. And that's the environment we're in. That's the one that we're competing in.
Larry, international, that's a great word that Jim just raised. Where does the Pac-12 stand on international?
Well, we're tired of expanding east, so we decided to expand west. I didn't come to this role thinking we were going to be focused on international. Ted and I know each other from the world of tennis, where for 20 years, we're very focused on global expansion. But I had an aha moment in my first 100 days as I was traveling around our campuses, meeting with our presidents about their overarching objectives and trying to figure out how athletics fit in as we designed our strategy for the conference. I kept hearing about the diversity of our campuses, the citizens of a global world, the amount of time our presidents and their senior leadership spend overseas building their brand, building research affiliations, recruiting students, connecting with alumni. And that's when the light went off and said, well, if we think about athletics as the front porch for the university that gets the most exposure, and it's the earliest touch point for the brand of the university, and you think about, as a university president, athletics in that regard, well, athletics could really help with your global aspirations. And that led to a lot of discussion about priorities in China and the connection we've got being the leading research institutions on the West Coast with the Pacific Rim. So we decided to do a test and launch a China initiative where we send teams over there, amazing experiences for the student athletes, great opportunity to develop the brands of our schools, get some exposure and create some touch points also for alumni and for university leadership over there. And those early tours, we've sent UCLA men's basketball teams, Cal women's basketball teams, all-star volleyball teams this summer. We're sending an all-star men's basketball team. It's gone very well. There's been a lot of enthusiasm. We decided to take the next step and actually we're going to have the first ever regular season game over in China to kick off the men's basketball season in 2015 with a non-conference game. We have the University of Washington playing against the University of Texas on November 15th, 2015 in Shanghai. And it's going to be great. It's going to be live broadcast back here on ESPN. Be a great experience. The presidents of both universities are going to be there with lots of alumni and trustees, and it's going to be a great marketing opportunity for the universities. We hope it's going to be an annual thing. In fact, I'm going to issue the invitation tonight to Commissioner Delaney that in 2016 or 17, we'd love a Pac-12 team to play against a Big Ten team for this opening tip-off game in China, and we see it. There's a lot of enthusiasm on our campuses for it. It's been a great bridge between the athletic side and the academic side. It's been a great way to demonstrate, above getting through all the noise about the money and the exposure, there's been a great way to tie athletics to the broader academic mission.
All right, let's take one more question here from the audience.
This is a Conference Network question. I'm curious if you foresee Tier 2 or Tier 1 rights migrating to Conference Networks, and if so, how soon?
What do you mean by Tier 2 or Tier?
The slate of games that now go to the networks or to ESPN as opposed to the inventory that goes to the conference networks.
Each of us have a slightly different setup. I can comment quickly from the Pac-12 perspective. As part of our agreements with ESPN and Fox, we have a draft so that every week ESPN might have a first pick, or Fox might have a first pick, or Pac-12 networks might have a first pick. ESPN and Fox have more of the first picks than the Pac-12 network, but it's a balancing act. For what they are paying us, they get the lion's share of the first picks. But if we were going to have a successful network, we needed to know we'd have really high-quality games on our network as well. So occasionally, we also get a first pick. So that's how we balance it. And it won't change. It's part and parcel of our agreements with ESPN and Fox.
We're 7 years into our network, and we've got probably another year before we go to negotiations. So I would be disinclined to tell you what we're going to do.
Okay. Let me wrap with our two special guests here with this. I just read this afternoon. Adam Silver, who is the new commissioner of the NBA, as you all know, gave his first interview since the Donald Sterling incident came out to Sports Illustrated today. And here's a comment that came right from this interview. He said, "To move the NBA through this to a better place, I feel that obligation. I feel the weight of it on my shoulders." And I thought that was very appropriate to raise with the two of you tonight. Larry, you dealt with some of this in tennis more accurately, where there was a racial issue with the Williams sisters in Indian Wells. But Jim, of course, under your stewardship, Penn State went through a horrific experience. When you hear Adam Silver make that comment, I'm not trying to equate situations here, simply your position. How does that resonate with you?
I think that one of the mistakes, it's not a mistake or misunderstanding, is you really have to look at whether it's a commissioner of baseball be 30 years ago versus Commissioner of Baseball today. Adam Silver today versus Larry Kennedy of 40 years ago. So, Adam has some authority. He exercised it. He probably exercised it with the full knowledge of his ownership, and so I think he represented the NBA exceptionally well from the standpoint and has the authority to act. Most conference commissioners do not have authority over personnel, who the athletic director is, who the head football coach is, and who the president of the university is. So, we work for the university, and if I think somebody's not a very good football or basketball coach, I should keep that opinion to myself. If I think a different quarterback should be playing, and if a person acts out or is engaged in serious misconduct, that typically is going to play out at the institutional level. So we have some modest authority for disciplining in the sports-like conduct area, a coach or a player, but it's very limited. And there's no expectation when somebody really goes off veers off in the wrong personal direction that I will right that. Because there's a chain of command on the campus. It goes from the Board of Trustees, that authority comes from the state, to the university president, to the athletic director, and then down to the coach. There's no misperception that I'm involved in that chain or that I'm going to write that at Ohio State or Michigan or Penn State or any other place.
And I'd say, when those issues come before you as a commissioner where you do have to decide, you get a lot of advice from people. At the end of the day, it's a very lonely decision that you've got to make, where it's vested with you. I've got, a lot of regard for the decision that Adam ultimately made after obviously a lot of consultation. It was a principled decision. It was a strong decision. And I look at it in the context of the role sport plays in society. And we're all very privileged to work in sport. And it's about fun and the games and competition and all that. But sport's got a larger role in society. And I think when, in these rare instances, when you see issues that question discrimination, hate, equality, to step up and make a principled decision and make a statement that our league or our conference or our sports body stands for principles of fairness and we're against discrimination and hate, I think it's very powerful. And I like to think of what we do in the broader context of sport being able to have a positive role that influences society. So I think he made that decision on behalf of his owners on that basis. I know Jim's made decisions like that, on that basis. I've made decisions on that basis, and makes you feel good in a way that sport can actually make a positive statement in terms of where society is going.
Thank you very much to Larry and Jim for addressing a whole wide spectrum of topics tonight, some difficult ones. And thank you, Jim, thank you for traveling to San Francisco to be with us.
Thank you.
Jim Delaney, Commissioner of the Big Ten, Larry Scott, Commissioner of the Pac-12.
Thanks, Ted.
We thank our audiences here on radio, television, and the internet. This meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California, the place to be in the know, is adjourned.